All right, well, without further ado, please let me introduce our guest, Ted Drake. Ted Drake is the Global Accessibility Leader at Intuit, where he works on Intuit's desktop, web, and mobile products. Ted is also an experienced engineer and developer evangelist, and is the co-founder of Intuit's Special Needs and Abilities Network for employees that promotes Intuit's diversity in hiring programs. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand things over to Ted to get us started.
Thank you, Grace. So as she mentioned, my name is Ted Drake, and I am the Global Accessibility Leader at Intuit. We have a small team at Intuit, but we have a larger group of people that we work with. We have a accessibility champion program at Intuit. So we have four people in the core. We just added a subject matter expert this week, so that's why I had a little bit of a number change. And then we have what we call our level 2 champions, which are people that have gone through training and customer awareness, worked with customers, done closed captioning, audio descriptions, and they create our local and product leaders. And then we have 700 people across Intuit, which we call our accessibility champions. So we're a small team, but we have large growth. Now, Intuit has a long history with DeQ. When I started at Intuit 9 years ago, we had already worked with DeQ. Lori Samuels, who I believe now might be with Microsoft. She set up our relationship with DeQ. So we already had testing, training, and DeQ had been working with some of our product teams to do audits and working with them to do prioritization. So we've been a big fan of DeQ for the last 9 years. And when they asked me if I could do a talk, I said, sure, I'd love to. But I don't want to talk about compliance. I don't want to talk about testing as a tool. I want to talk about testing as it helps the customer experience. Before I start, I'm currently talking to you from Palm Springs. So I want to respectfully acknowledge the Cahuilla Nation, who have stewarded this land, Palm Springs, throughout the generations. Slack has a little thing where it allows you to say hands up. I think everybody here has probably seen more than their share of presentations about automated testing that focus on compliance. So raise your hand virtually if you have seen enough presentations about compliance, because this is not a talk about compliance. I'm not going to be talking about legal at all. I'm not going to be talking about VPATs. I'm not going to be talking about how you create reports for your management. That's not what this talk is about. This talk is about customers and about how we have used automated testing so that we could focus on the customer experience and not focusing on the drudgery of day-to-day testing and stuff like that. Testing, automation takes a lot of the work out of the picture. So with that in mind, I want to introduce you to one of our customers. His name is Brandon Biggs. Brandon came to us, I want to say it's been about 3 years now. He was trying to use QuickBooks Online. He was having problems with some of it. So he reached out to us to find out how we could start making some improvements so that he could better use the product. He is the CFO of a company in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's also a developer. He also has his MFA in inclusive design. And currently he's a researcher at the Smith Ketterwell. Let's get that name, Smith Ketterwell Institution. So after we met Brandon, we started having multiple conversations with him. We started creating reports, and we've closed over 50 issues based on what Brandon has told us. And Brandon is just one of many customers that we work really closely with. But we asked Brandon to create a video that explained what accessibility meant to him as a customer. And so that's what this video is about.
Hi, my name is Brandon Biggs, and I am a T-Sheets and QuickBooks Online customer. One thing that's interesting for me is that I am a blind user as well. I am the Chief Financial Officer of Sonia Biggs Educational Services, Inc., which is a company in the South Bay, Gilroy area. For me, accessibility is the only part of the interface that I see. So if HTML elements are properly used and there's text that describes what the different graphical elements are, then I can use the interface. Otherwise, I can't use the interface. So accessibility is critical to my prosperity and success with the interface.
Let me go to the
Hi,
next.
my name is Brandon Biggs.
There we go. Okay, so we just heard from a customer, and the customer is basically, it's hard for me to just call Brandon a customer because he's been so close with our team, but he's talking about images, alt text, field, labels, keyboard accessibility. These are the things that make it possible for him to use our products. And these are things that we use automated testing to find so that we can fix them before he actually has to encounter those issues. Here's a test result. This is from WorldSpace, and this is a list of images that have that lack alternate text. They may lack the alt attribute, and without the alt attribute, they also lack role equals none presentation or something that tells assistive technology that this is a decorative image. This is a list of errors, and a lot of times what we see with automated testing is we look at this and we think, I've got to fix that. I've got to fix that. I got to fix that. They're just tasks. They're things that we check off because we know that these are an error and these impact the customer, but they're sort of abstracted from the customer experience. And what we need to do is we need to look at this error and say, this isn't just an error that I need to fix. This is an error that impacts our customer. And let me show you what that actually means. So this was a customer experience. We were interviewing another one of our customers, and he had a question. We were actually trying out a new page. And before we launched this new page, we wanted to get his impression because he had left some comments about this, this part of QuickBooks Online. And in the middle of this conversation, he comes to this section and he finds an image without alt text.
Close button. So I up arrowed until I found close, which I just sort of know is usually the top of the dialogue. And then I down arrowed from there. Image slash SVG plus XML back semicolon base 64 back PD 94 PWW GDM Vic 2 LVBJ 0 IMS 4 WIEBL DMNVZ UZ 0 IVVRGL PZ 4 KPHN 2 ZIP 4 B such 0 HR 0 Z Davel 3 D 3 53 by 5 VCM CVM JLMC 9 HHTPG 5 Z onset W 5 RPS HR W 8 VD 3 D 3 LNC ZLM 9 Y XOTK 5 L 3 shot double. All right, so I hit the silence key. That wasn't particularly helpful.
And if you couldn't hear that, here's an impression of what's happening. He comes to this image, and it's an image that's using an SVG file for the source. When you don't put an alt text on it, then you don't put an alt attribute on it, then what happens is the screen reader wants to tell the user something about what this image represents, and so it announces the image. Now, it's a huge SVG file that it has all these different designs in it. And the screen reader is going at like 100 miles an hour when it starts this image, but there's so much content that it's like the screen reader is trying to catch up and take a breath. So by the end of the image, in the meantime, Ben is sitting there hitting the stop key, stop, stop, stop. The screen reader itself is literally fatigued. This is a bad experience. Ben wanted to do something in this modal, but in order to do this modal, he's got to go through this image every time. And he's got to sit there and hit the stop key to stop the screen reader from announcing this. So when you look at this and you see that you have 50 images missing alternate text, think about that video of Ben. Think about how that actually, that's not just an abstract list of images, that's actually a customer that's having to deal with a really bad experience each time. So when we look at automated testing, we've already got an idea that we're dealing with customers. We're not dealing with test results, we're dealing with customers. Let's look at 3 different types of tasks. And I think that this is how at Intuit we've been trying to figure out how is the best way to use our time is to look at these tasks. We have mundane. Mundane tasks are excellent for automated testing. Many times it's a Boolean. It's like, Does an image have an alt attribute? Yes or no? It's got to be yes. So that's a mundane task because we have to make sure that every image has an alt attribute. We need to make sure that every input has a label. There's also a lot of things with automated testing that's really good. For instance, we don't want duplicate ID values. Currently, we have an issue where some of our SVG files have an ID within some of the lines that are within the SVG. It's kind of silly, but when you use that SVG multiple times on a page, then all of a sudden we have duplicate ID values. That's not something that a developer should be manually testing. That's something that we should be catching with automated testing, fix once, and then it goes throughout. Other things that we've noticed are pages lacking the language attribute, iframes missing the title attribute. These are mundane tasks. These are not things that our developers and designers should be spending a lot of time on. They should be able to use automated testing, find the issue as early as possible, don't push it to production, and clear that out of the way. Then we get complicated tasks. Complicated tasks are tasks that may be fairly easy to solve. For instance, maybe all you have to do is go in there and change a ARIA attribute. Or maybe it's something where you have a form input and it just needs a label. So sometimes the solution is easy, but to get to that, you have to deal with multiple repositories. You have to deal with something that's used by multiple product teams. So you have to make sure that when you make this fix, that it doesn't have unseen complications. We recently fixed a major issue with QuickBooks Online, and the code change was literally one attribute. But before we added that one attribute, we had to run, we crowdsourced, we got a bunch of people together to test all of the different pages in QuickBooks Online because we wanted to make sure that we were not going to have any kind of unintended consequences. These are complicated issues. These are the ones where people like to work on because they know that they're collaborating. So we want to get rid of the mundane and start thinking about complicated. And finally, we have interesting. And interesting is where you really enjoy. This is where, you know, if you want to keep your developers and your designers engaged, give them interesting challenges. Interesting challenges are the ones that require customer feedback. You can't just make a change. You have to understand what is this problem and how is it impacting them. And then you make a solution and you go back to the customer, you test them out and say, how is this working for you? Is it better? Is it worse? And then going back and forth. Interesting is what we want to spend our time on. Interesting and challenging. We don't want to spend our time on mundane. And that's why we want to use automated testing. So automated testing reduces the mundane. And when you reduce the mundane, it gives you more time for the interesting. And when you have time for interesting, you build exceptional product experiences. And that's where we're trying to go in this presentation. So let's look at some of the logistics. How do we get from one to the other? How do we, and believe me, this has been quite the journey at Intuit. I've been at Intuit now for 9 years, and I've seen this journey move from when we first started automated testing, when we first started clearing out the mundane, to the point now where we have people embedded in each group that are working on those challenging and interesting problems. The first thing you need to know is that testing in production is too late. We use WorldSpace. We use WorldSpace and it runs against all of our production sites. It runs every week and we keep track of errors that are on there. I'm not going to say that we're 100% clean. We certainly have our share of errors that are long-standing. But if it gets to production, you know, that's backwards. That's going back in and fixing problems that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Sometimes those problems date back 9, 10, 12 years. You never know. So Intuit started a program about 5 years called Shift Left. And I know that DQ has some information on Shift Left. Shift Left is basically saying we had a bunch of engineers that were dedicated to quality engineering. We still have some. But instead of having a group of dedicated quality engineers that are testing code at the later stages of development, such as in production or just before it goes to production, let's shift the responsibility of quality testing to the earliest stages, which is design and engineering. And if we can get designers and engineers to create quality code from the very beginning, then we don't have those errors moving to production. But you can't expect designers and engineers that already have a full workload to take on all this responsibility if you don't provide them with the tools and the resources to do that. So enter Sagar Barbhaya. He's one of our core team. He spent 2 years doing Follow Me Homes with developers and engineers. That means that he would go to a developer's desk and he would watch them try to run automated testing. And he would watch them integrate automated testing into their build tools, their continuous integration tools, using browser-based testing. He then he tested different testing frameworks. So we tested Axe, and we tested Tenon, and we tested, we've been testing Wave. We've been testing just about everything. We've used Microsoft Accessibility Insights. We've used Lighthouse. So we're not married to one library. We're married to the library that works best in each particular instance. And so Sagar has been able to create documentation and frameworks so that if I'm a developer and I'm setting up my environment, I'm going to be coding in React, and I'm going to be using this build system, which is going to be using Selenium, and then I'm pushing to a continuous integration, and that's going to be using this framework, that we have automated testing that can fit in each level, so that we get rid of any mundane tasks at the linting stage. And then we can catch the challenging and interesting tasks before it goes to production. So our motto at Intuit is every build process gets tested. Every workshop that we give, design, development, product management, every workshop includes automated testing that's appropriate for that role. Every new employee goes through some training, and those training involved automated testing. And sometimes that automated testing is simply opening up Chrome and using Code Inspector and running something in the browser. Every accessibility champion installs browser plugins and runs their first. I didn't get that. Could you try again? My watch is talking to me. Every accessibility champion, as they go. Could you try? my watch just doesn't get it. Every accessibility champion has to go through a process where they install Chrome plugins so that they can do testing at any time. And that even includes managers, and that includes customer care agents, it includes developers, designers, even talent and acquisition, and our tech IT team. So everyone uses test tools. If automated testing and tools is normalized and everybody understands it, then it's not this exotic equipment that's sort of pushed out. One of the problems we had in the past was we tried a tool from the queue. It was a really, really good tool. It just didn't fit into anybody's workflow, and so it didn't get used. And it was sort of like Microsoft Accessibility Insights or Axe Pro. For us, it didn't work, so we had to find other solutions. Now, there was another team at Intuit, and they're going to be doing a talk at CSUN 21 probably, and possibly at AxeCon coming up. It's the design team for TurboTax, the developers that create our shared components for TurboTax. And so one of them became an accessibility champion. He started looking at their shared component library. And their shared component library not only had components, but it also had patterns. So you take this, and this component, and you put them together into a page, and then that page allows someone to do something like adding your tax form. And so they had this gallery that had all these components and had all these pages. And so they ran tests against them. They ran Axe against them, and they found thousands of issues. So they came up with their goals for how they were going to use automated testing to be proactive against their design system. They wanted to generate accessibility reports. They wanted to stop inserting any new issues. They wanted to identify the most problematic components. They wanted to address widespread issues first to maximize impact, and they wanted to track improvement over time. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later about the results, but if you have a goal like this, like I'm going to get into using automated testing, but here's my goal, then that's going to help you drive your program. At the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to empower our developers. And I should add designers also. We've used Sketch historically, but we're in the process of moving to Figma. And as we're rolling out Figma, we've already included accessibility plugins from the very beginning with Figma so that all of our designers have access to automated testing for contrast and semantic markup, headings, things like that, alternate text. If you can give everyone the tool that they need, then that gives them the power to create awesome code, clean code, code that's not just for accessibility, but also that's fast, that's easily maintainable, and that provides a great experience. So let's look at some of the results from the TurboTax team. When they started, they ran it against 500 screens and they found more than 2,000 errors. Now, when I say they found more than 2,000 errors, they also looked at the logs and they noticed that the logs had a lot of noise. And so some of the ACTS errors they turned off because those errors were so heavy that they weren't able to actually focus on what was critical. And those errors were duplicate ID values and color contrast. So it's not like they weren't going to fix them, but what they had to do is that if they could focus on 2,000 issues instead of 20,000 issues, then they were able to create a strategy better. In the first month, they closed 1,400 of those issues. And then over the course of several months, they were able to then, once they had only like 600 issues left, they were able to go in there and say, this is the component that we need to fix. And this may take a little bit more time, but they were able to go in there and fix it. So within a few months, they were down to 0 errors. And so they have a really clean, not only in the components, but also remember they have these pages that take a bunch of components and put them together. Now they're at 0 errors. Now, if a developer creates a new component or creates a new pattern and they run an automated testing, if there's an error, that's their fault. So they're really able to maintain the quality. And also as ACTS creates new rules, they're able to go back in and go through them. And also because they don't have any mundane issues, they're able to really focus on creative and interesting. And a great example is a new calendar date picker that's being developed. And they developed that picker with customers that use screen readers from the very beginning. They truly wanted to re-evaluate how they were doing a date picker and build a date picker that gave an exceptional experience for everyone. Fully keyboard accessible, fully understandable by a screen reader, semantic with proper ARIA attributes so that you knew what was happening. That's what happens. You get rid of the mundane and now you can start creating exceptional stuff. They also started creating new rules. So if they can detect that there's CSS that does any kind of transformation, any kind of motion, then they run an alert and they make sure that that CSS animation also includes support for reduced motion preferences. That's also the same with JavaScript motion. And they've also been able to go back in, turn on those errors that they originally disabled and cure the duplicate IDs and enforce color contrast. So they've been able, the developers have been able to really drive the color contrast solutions going through TurboTax. Not that they chose the colors, they worked with the design team for that, but they've been able to drive that transformation. When Intuit moved to React, because we had a bunch of different libraries, we had Angular, we had jQuery, we had Yahoo User Interface Library, we had all these different libraries. We had Sencha, Dojo. It was like this mishmash of different libraries, and we decided that we were going to go all in on React. And when we went all in with React, we also incorporated React linting. And so I gave a workshop to the Turbo team, and the Turbo team learned about React linting. One of the developers went back to his desk and implemented React linting into their development cycle. And they were able to close all of the issues within 1 week that could be detected via React linting. It's really easy. It keeps you from adding errors in the very earliest stages. And when you can fix an error at the earliest stage, that ultimately saves time and money. So let's move to some of the complicated issues. By the way, if you can't see the screen, I do occasionally have some images, but they're not necessarily important. So for instance, on this one, it's a wrought iron gate from Morocco, and it's looking out into a courtyard, and there's a lot of mishmash of design and patterns. So I'm sorry I haven't described all of the images, but the most interesting part of this is that we're moving to the complicated. So here's some examples. Headings, keyboard, and focus management. These are not things that are going to be found in automated testing automatically. What you're going to do is you're going to find hints and clues in automated testing. So when you're running automated testing, you might find pages that lack any headings. You might find pages that have non-interactive components with non-click event. You might find link tags, A tags without href attributes. So the problem with these is that non-semantic markup, if you're just using a div, may not be found by automated testing. So you can go through your test results and you can start finding some patterns, but ultimately this is where we start getting into manual testing. And automated testing is only going to find about 40%. So use your automated testing to get rid of the easy 40%, and let's focus on where it gets complicated. So you don't have good headings. Now is where you go back to your designers and you start teaching them about headings. What is the semantic structure of a page? How should a heading be an H1 or an H2? Go back to your customers. We learned a lot from Brandon Biggs where he was describing, when I'm on this pop-up, I wanted to have a heading this. When I'm on this panel, I don't know that this is a panel. I think this is a whole page, so that should be an H1. Keyboard, everything should be keyboard accessible. But if you're only depending on automated testing, you're not going to get it. So we try to encourage everybody to use a keyboard, no mouse. We call it No Mouse Mondays. It's a common pattern across the industry. If everybody uses the keyboard for 5 minutes a week, they're going to catch stuff before it goes to production. They're going to catch stuff that's in production that they didn't realize. This might be that a button has keyboard focus, but there's no indication. Or it could be that someone used a div as a button and it doesn't receive keyboard focus. So we want to make sure that we understand our keyboard. And that's going to be your complicated stuff. And focus management is also a design thing. It's not just developers, you have to set focus on this. It goes back to your designers saying, Billy Gregory did a talk, Some User Experience, where it's like saying, designers, if you're only designing for the mouse, you're only designing for mouse users. And if you're only designing for mouse users, you're basically going back to your engineers and saying, hey, you design the keyboard experience. And so we want to go back to our designers and we want to say, you're developing this interaction and it's got a modal that pops up. Where does focus go? Does it go on the first input? Does it go on the container itself? Does it go on a heading? Does it go on a close button? We want your guidance so that when it goes to the developer, they can easily set that focus. And then when they close that modal, where does the focus go back? So these are the things where you get complicated because you have conversations. And finally, we have interesting. Interesting is where it's like a story, it's like an epic. These are the changes that really drive exceptional customer experiences. We had an issue with ARIA owns. I'll talk about a little bit, user preferences and color branding. So ARIA owns, this is a classic example of having a good relationship with your customers. So 1 week we received 3 messages from 3 of our customers that use JAWS or NVDA saying that the main navigation disappeared in QuickBooks Online. And so we're like, oh, this is terrible. What are we going to do? So we went back to our code and there were no code changes. We didn't push anything that caused this. Most of our developers are using Macs with VoiceOver and Safari. So we tested it with Macs and VoiceOver and Safari and there was no problem. So we opened up our Windows machines, and there we started to realize that NVDA and JAWS were having problems with Chrome and sometimes Firefox. It seemed like it was more directed to Chrome, so we reached out to the Google team, and we asked the Google team, here's the problem that we're seeing, what's happening? And in the meantime, we had also interviewed those customers. We'd seen what was happening, and so we were trying to figure it out. The Google team looked at it, they looked at what they had pushed, they didn't see anything, and then one of the developers realized that we were using the ARIA owns attribute when we should have been using the ARIA controls attribute. Now, ARIA controls is, I put that on a button, it says, this button, when you click on it, is going to control the display of this content over here. So when we put it on our hamburger menu, the menu that hides and shows our main navigation, when we put ARIA controls on the hamburger button, it's basically saying when you click on this hamburger button, it's gonna display or hide the main navigation, which is what you would expect. That's perfect. But instead we had used ARIA owns, and ARIA owns had not been well supported by browsers and screen readers for the longest time. So we were using ARIA owns, but there was no impact. And then all of a sudden, browsers and screen readers started better supporting ARIA owns. And so what ARIA owns means is that the hamburger menu, that button, was basically saying, go find that whole main navigation, remove it from the DOM, so it's no longer in the page, and insert it in the button as a text node. So it's basically saying this button owns all of this content, and it's now going to become the text node. And that's what happened. And that's why all of a sudden, a lot of our stuff started breaking. ARIA owns, this was my fault. I didn't fully understand it, and I know that there were issues that I wrote ARIA owns instead of ARIA controls over the last 4 or 5 years. So it's one of those things where we had a debt and we didn't know about it until it hit. This is where we have interesting things. It takes a lot of work to fix these things. We were able to create automated testing. We created a bookmarklet. We did source control searches and documentation and open source contribution in order to solve all of the improper use of ARIA owns across our product. And we were able to fix that in a month. We've also been integrating support for user preferences, especially with motion sensitivity. And we've also been able to use automated testing to find where people have been using hard-coded typography, hard-coded fonts, hard-coded pixels, colors, because everything should be using our color branding, our color themes, and we should be using our standard typography. So I wanted to leave with a summary of action items. I'm looking at the time and it's getting kind of close. Mundane errors are your customer experience barriers. Don't think that mundane errors are not important. They are important. But these are errors that can be easily found in automated testing, and these are errors that should be caught very early. And you need to associate these errors with the customer experience. If it means creating videos and interviews and attaching those videos to bugs, then do that. Because we need people to know that fixing these 100 images in your blog is having this impact on your customers. Every process should include automated testing. That includes design, that includes linting from the very earliest stages, that includes the build, pushing to production, testing after production. You should always have automated testing, and there's a testing library appropriate for each one. Use inner source or open contribution to clear your backlog. We've done this a lot at Intuit. In 2019, I think we closed 2,000. I shouldn't have said that. I had that marked down. 200. I think we closed 200 bugs across the company. That was open contribution. That means that I work on this team and I'm going to solve a bug that's in your team. And we do that because we use a common repository and we understand that we're helping each other out. Find your challenges and your interesting problems. At Intuit, we say we fall in love with the problems, not the solutions. So the problem is this. How are we going to find a solution? Well, we go back to the customer and we test their solutions. And the customer may say, the solution that we loved and we thought was perfect. And I just did this recently with Brandon. I thought, I know exactly what to do on this page. And I gave him a test page. He's like, no, that doesn't work at all. Fall in love with the problem. We want to solve the problem, but be open to solutions. And those solutions need to be tested with your customers to make sure that they work. Interview your customers constantly. You have an open feedback with your customers. When you think you fixed something, go back to the customers and let them know. And finally, remember that your developers and designers are also your customers. So as the core accessibility team, do follow me homes with your designers and your developers. Find out where they're confused. Find out where they have barriers so that you can help them fix those barriers so that they can remove their mundane issues and they can focus on those challenging and interesting problems. Now, I still have some time. So at this point, I wanted to leave it open for some questions. You can follow me on Twitter at Ted_Drake. And you can see my engineering website is last-child.com.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Ted. Let's get into some questions. So we had a couple of questions crop up during the presentation about Figma. And we had a couple people interested about the various plugins that help you address issues. Could you speak a little bit around how you use Figma?
Yeah, so Figma is a design tool. One of the nice things about Figma is that it replaces multiple tools. So we were using Sketch and we were using prototyping software and we were using a gallery software, Zeppelins and all these things. Figma brings them all in together. One of the nice things about Figma is that they have a strong community. So all of the plugins like Stark and Contrast that were developed for Sketch are already available for Figma. So when you go into Figma, look for plugins and you'll find probably about a dozen accessibility plugins that deal with color mostly, but there's also one for keyboard. And I believe there's one for semantic, so that you're using proper semantic terms. And I believe there's also one for alternate text so that designers are better able to write accessibility text. Did that answer? There was a second part of that question.
Yeah, I think the main question was about the different plugins, and secondarily, you know, what might be some pros you see to switching to Figma? Somebody asks.
The main pro that we had with Figma is that we have one location for, Figma is now becoming not only a tool to design, but it's a place where we can leave all of our design documentation in Figma. So from the accessibility team, the problem is that when someone created a design, for instance, in our component, so we have a design for a date picker. As a product team member, I'm designing the new banking component and I want to use the date picker. How do I get the documentation on how to use that date picker? So one of the nice things about Figma is that we can also bind the accessibility documentation to the design requirements, to the symbols so that they can better use them. So when they use that date picker, the designer knows here are the accessibility considerations. Now in the past, and also a developer, when they go to Figma, they can get the information they need. In the past, we would use Sketch for designing. We would use Zeppelin to pass the finished renderings over to engineers. We had wikis to store, accessibility considerations for the date picker. We had, information was scattered. At Intuit, what we're looking at doing is basically having one site, which is all of our engineering and designing, information, so that it's like the source of truth. And Figma is going to be everything for your design. And for developers, you're going to go to Storybook, and that's going to have all of the engineering information you need. So we're really reducing the landscape of tools.
Excellent, thank you. So Kelly here asks, Can you share some of the major breakthroughs you and your team have had over the past 9 years? Seems like you've come a long way in that time, but curious about some of the big changes that help you get there.
I think color contrast has been a big change. Well, the first thing that happened when I first joined Intuit, we had no keyboard experience. Keyboard just didn't exist because we had one CSS rule that a lot of people may know, and that was outline equals none. And so essentially all of our products had this rule that basically said, when you focus on an object, remove the outline. So that was one of the first things that I did was made sure that everybody knew that outline equals none was a very dangerous CSS rule. And we were able to, in a fairly reasonable amount of time, get all of our products to remove that and redesign their focus indication. That made a huge impact on usability across our products. Now, Intuit is a financial software company. We don't make games. We make accounting. So our accountants want to keep their fingers on a keyboard. They don't want to keep moving for a mouse. So that was really critical for our user experience. So it was also understanding what's going to have the biggest impact on our customer, what is the biggest barrier to our customer, and how do we solve that? The other thing, color contrast was big. We would have pages that had gray on gray. And so it was a matter of educating designers and running automated testing and then tracking all that automated testing in order to show the progress as we were replacing bad color usage with good color usage. The other thing I would say is automated testing is great, but we had no visibility into it. So the way that it works is that a lot of times people with their build systems, they would run a build, it would generate a message, and then that would get sent to the developer. So you'd go to meet with a developer and they open up their Outlook and they've got 50,000 unread emails because these are messages being sent to them from their dev systems. So one of the things that we looked at is how can we surface that information? And we found a developer in Canada that was having the same problem. So he built a dashboard, and that dashboard was a way for him to get information from different builds. And it was fantastic. And what we found out was that QuickBooks Online was running Lighthouse every time they did a build. So we were able to work with that developer to add Lighthouse to his dashboard. So now all of a sudden we had visibility into automated testing for accessibility every time someone built their plugin. And that was a really, really big insight for us, because now all of a sudden we could see which plugins had the most errors, which plugins were doing really good, and we were able to start tracking them better. So I would say being able to get metrics and the bigger picture is really critical. That would be one of our big insights.
Excellent. And to segue off of the end of your answer there, somebody is asking about success metrics and notes that even though this talk isn't about compliance or reporting, how do you justify the effort internally?
Yeah, I always like to say that I'm really lucky to be at Intuit. When it comes to return on investment, I don't prove return on investment. We focus on the customer experience. So at Intuit, it's about the customer experience. It's not on if I spend $100, am I going to get 150 back? Not when it comes to accessibility and product experience. So one of the things that we do look at is the voice of customer. We have a way that we can track the voice of customer. One of the cool things, one of our product teams, they've always tracked keyboard presses. This is T-Sheets. It's a timesheet. They're able to find out when they fix a button and make a keyboard accessible. They've been able to find, some of them are discovered by keyboard users within hours. The longest it took for someone to discover an accessibility improvement was 9 days. But in average, when they push a production on improvement with keyboard accessibility, it's usually found within a few days. And they've been able to find the number of, and now this is anonymous data, they're not tracking customers, but they're basically saying how many people, unique IDs, are using keyboard to actually hit the enter key on these components. So they're able to track like 20% of the people use keyboards. That also has been able to them to track the progress as the product is becoming more accessible. Then we're doing customer interviews, voice of customer surveys. I'm trying to think of what else. One of the things I do is I have a list of the 50 most traffic plugins for QuickBooks Online. When I say a plugin, it means a screen like add an invoice. And then we have a test account. And that test account has employees, it has sales, it has bank accounts. So every month I run each of those 50 test accounts against Lighthouse because I have a consistent data usage. And I'm able to track which of those plugins go up or down and how's the progress. And that's really been helpful for us to make sure that we're building progressively better experience for our customers.
Excellent, thank you. There's a question here about the use of WorldSpace. This person asks, what drove you to the use of WorldSpace? I think the moderator mentioned this is rebranded to Axe now. Yes.
Oh, to be honest, it was set up before I joined Intuit, and it's worked so well that there's never been a reason to not use WorldSpace. I know that there are equally good testing libraries. One of the things we liked about WorldSpace is that it's easy to use. It's easy to share access. So when I set up a new team, I'm able to add them to WorldSpace quite easily. The reports are pretty good, and they've been working on those over the years. I would say if you're not using an automated testing server that can spider pages and you're looking at competitors, by all means look at how easy is it to use and what do the reports look like. The other thing is we were looking at one of the competitors, and this was early days. I'm sure they've solved it by now, but there was a security concern at one time because we were pushing code to their servers to be tested, and our security team didn't like that. So we use WorldSpace only to test publicly available, so there's no security concern at this point.
Awesome, thank you. Another question here about automated tools. John asks, what automated tools do you use in your continuous integration accessibility linting?
So with linting, we use React Lint. There's one that's done by React, and then we use React Axe. With most of our others, we're using a combination of Axe Core with, we have Selenium, we have WebDriver.js, we have WebDriver.io. We use those in order to combine with our previous build tools. So if they're building something, then we've got a form of Axe that can run against it. With Android, we use the Android, what's the name of that one? It's not Android Scanner, but we use the Android test library with Espresso. And with iOS, we still use the accessibility inspector within Xcode. And we also use the Android scanner on the device.
Excellent. So somebody is also asking about what's the difference in what you catch using a linter versus using a plugin like Axe?
In linting, you're catching things before it's even saved to their, you're catching things at the earliest stages. So you can catch things in linting before it goes to the browser, but that's the benefit of linting, is it really catches it early. Now, when you've built the page and you push it to a browser and you're testing it on your local machine and you're running Chrome and you're running Axe in Chrome, it's going to give you better results because it's actually saying, well, originally I was working on a snippet that did nothing but add a rel tag, a rel attribute to a link. That may not say much with a linter, but when you actually compile it and create your page and you run that in Axe, then it's going to give you the more holistic approach. So I wouldn't say that it's replacing it. What I'm saying is linting helps you catch things at a very, very early stage.
Absolutely. So Miguel here asks, when you say, quote, listen to your clients, quote, do you keep track of what percentage of your clients are, for example, keyboard users, screen reader users, mouse users, etc.?
With the exception of T-Sheets and the fact that they're able to keep anonymous data as to like how many people have hit enter key or spacebar key on some of their components, no, we don't track. That's a privacy issue. So we don't track if people are using assistive technology. So no, it's possible, but it's not something that we want to do. We want to track how many people are leaving us comments about it, that kind of thing. But we're not running significant analytics that would determine anything that might be a privacy violation. I think it's really key. We can do a lot, but I've always pushed that we don't do that. We don't need to push that envelope.
Right.
Let me give you a couple of exceptions, because I think you need to understand that this is a flexible. We fixed this, but at one point on TurboTax Mobile, we had an interaction where the user would slide their finger across the screen in order to move back or forward. But we knew that that wouldn't work with someone that used a screen reader or they used switch control. So iOS and Android surfaced the fact that assistive technology is running. When we can detect that assistive technology was running, we didn't track them, but what we did was we inserted a button. So instead of requiring them to swipe the screen, we inserted back and continue buttons. So that's an example of where we detected that assistive technology was running. And when we detected that it was running, we provided an alternate navigation method. What we've done is that proved really well. So we got rid of the swipe navigation, and now everybody has the back and continue buttons. So that's an example where we're not tracking their usage, but we were making an accommodation according to their usage.
Excellent. All right, we just have a couple minutes left. I think we can sneak in one or two more questions. There's a couple questions here about your design system and how you include people with disabilities in the design process.
We do a lot of customer interviews, and most of these customer interviews are with people. So we listen to voice of customer. That means that someone's in our product and they leave a comment. When they leave a comment, then we can track that. And if someone left a comment that deals with accessibility, we run a bunch of keywords. So someone may not say, I have low vision but they may say, I'm trying to use this, but I can't read, or it's too light, or it's too gray. We will contact them for more information, or customers have reached out to us directly. We have a feedback email on our site. Those are the people that we reach out to because they've come forward and said, I use accessibility, assistive technology, or I have a disability. For the design system, it's kind of hard because most of the stuff that we're in development is behind a firewall. So when we are testing a new component, then we have to create a version that can be seen externally. And then we call in some of our customers that have worked with us over the years so that we can get their feedback. Brandon Biggs, Lucy Greco are two examples. They helped with the date picker. And when we were doing our typography, we reached out to Luz Rello, and I can't believe I'm forgetting his name, the guy that created Beeline Reader, to make sure that our typography worked with people that had dyslexia. So we also look for experts.
Fantastic. All right, we're almost at the top of the hour, so I think it is time to wrap up. Thank you so much, Ted, for your presentation and your great answers to all of our questions. And thank you, everybody, for attending and for your participation today.
Hey, Grace, can I add one question? One little bit. I'm always
Please.
adding that little bit. Going back to that last answer, the other thing is that we have a list of employees at Intuit that have come forward and say that they have disabilities. It's so they're public about it. And we also use them for testing. So for instance, our motion library, we leaned heavily on internal employees that had motion sensitivity. So that's the other thing, is keep in mind that your employees are also your customers.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you, Ted. And thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.